Can you imagine an entire army defeated without fighting, just by the intervention of an angel? How is it possible that God used a single celestial being to change the course of history 3 times? In this video, we will explore these incredible biblical stories and discover how divine authority and the power of angels can overcome any human force, leaving surprising lessons for our faith and life today. Have you ever wondered why God sends angels to intervene in human history so powerfully? In the Bible, angels are not mere messengers. They are agents of divine power, capable of carrying out God's will in ways that defy all human logic. Before we narrate how a single angel destroyed entire armies 3 times, it is crucial to understand the historical and spiritual context of these events. In ancient times, kingdoms and armies relied solely on their strength, strategy, and numbers. War was the primary tool for resolving conflicts, and victory was attributed to military power or the intelligence of leaders. However, the Bible shows us that, on many occasions, God intervened directly in history to protect His people or fulfill His purpose. Angels were the chosen instruments for these interventions, demonstrating that divine authority surpasses any human force. Furthermore, biblical accounts reveal that the presence of an angel could completely change the course of a battle. These celestial beings not only possessed the physical power to defeat enemies, but also carried God's authority to judge and punish, fulfilling their mission with precision. Therefore, when we read that a single angel destroyed entire armies, we should not imagine an ordinary being, but the direct manifestation of God's sovereign power. Historically, these events occurred in contexts of extreme threats to the people of Israel. Powerful kingdoms and large armies posed imminent danger, and divine intervention was necessary to protect the righteous and ensure the fulfillment of God's promises. Understanding this background allows us to better appreciate the magnitude of the miracles we are about to recount and their spiritual relevance for us today. Finally, the spiritual context reminds us that war in the Bible is not only physical, but also symbolic. The battle between good and evil, obedience and rebellion, is reflected in these historical events. Angels act as instruments of God to demonstrate that His power and authority are absolute. This context sets the stage for understanding how a single angel could, surprisingly and decisively, defeat entire armies on 3 separate occasions, leaving profound lessons about faith, obedience, and divine protection. Can you imagine the impact of a single angel capable of defeating an entire army without the soldiers even fighting? This story seems incredible, almost like a fantasy tale. Yet the Bible shows us that such divine interventions occurred in Israel's history, spectacularly demonstrating God's power and the authority of His angels. The first of these 3 occasions we will examine teaches deep lessons about faith, obedience, and divine protection. The first event occurs during the reign of King Hezekiah, when the army of King Sennacherib of Assyria surrounded Jerusalem. The account, recorded in 2 Kings 19:35, describes how an angel of the Lord went out and killed 185,000 soldiers in a single night, resulting in an unexpected victory for Israel. Imagine the magnitude of this action. An entire army, representing a formidable threat to the city, was destroyed without the Israelites having to fight. The Bible emphasizes that it was not military strategy or the number of warriors that determined victory, but God's direct intervention through his angel. This event has significant spiritual implications. Sennacherib relied on the strength of his army and underestimated God's protection over Jerusalem. In contrast, Hezekiah and his people remained faithful, seeking divine help through prayer and trust. The lesson is clear. Obedience and faith in God can bring results beyond imagination, even in the face of seemingly invincible forces. This first miracle shows us how divine intervention can change history in an instant, demonstrating that God's authority does not depend on human resources, but on his sovereign power. The second event is found in the book of Joshua during the conquest of Canaan. Although in this case a single angel is not described with the same lethal force as in Jerusalem, there is the figure of an angel who guides, directs, and protects the Israelite army, as in the famous story of the fall of Jericho. Joshua 5:13-15 describes how a man, later revealed as the commander of the Lord's army, instructs Joshua on divine strategy, and his presence ensures victory. Although the emphasis here is more strategic than destructive, it still shows that a celestial being, acting on God's behalf, can determine the outcome of a battle without direct human intervention. The angel's strength is measured not only in destruction, but in authority and spiritual direction. The third event occurs in the story of Israel's armies during the time of David. In 1 Chronicles 21:15-30, God sends an angel to execute judgment on Israel for David's sin in conducting a census of the people. The angel causes the death of thousands as part of divine correction, but halts his action when David intercedes and offers sacrifice. This episode combines judgment, mercy, and the intervention of an angel acting directly under God's command. Again, a single celestial being radically changes the fate of an army, demonstrating God's absolute authority over life and death. Analyzing these three events, we notice a pattern. In each case, the angel does not act independently, but as a direct instrument of God's will. Its power lies not in its own strength, but in the authority God grants it. This teaches us that angels are extensions of the divine plan, capable of performing actions that exceed any human capacity, whether protecting, guiding, or judging. Moreover, each event reflects a different aspect of God's power. In Jerusalem, the angel executes judgment and protection in a devastating way. In Jericho, he guides and directs strategically. And in David's time, he combines judgment with mercy. This shows that angelic intervention is not uniform, but adapted to God's will and the circumstances of his people. The spiritual lesson is clear. Trusting in God means recognizing that his power can manifest in unexpected ways, and our obedience and faith are fundamental to being part of his plan. Finally, these stories are not just historical accounts. They are also symbols of the spiritual struggle between good and evil. The armies represented opposing forces, while the angels represent divine authority, protecting the righteous and fulfilling God's purposes. Learning from these events helps us understand that even when we face seemingly impossible obstacles in daily life, faith and trust in God can produce extraordinary results. In conclusion, the first story of Jerusalem, the guidance in Jericho, and the judgment during David's time teach us that a single angel, acting under God's authority, can change the course of history. Each account combines power, obedience, and divine purpose, reminding us that God's power transcends any human force. These interventions are a reminder that fully trusting in God and obeying His commands can yield results that defy all human logic and expectation. Have you ever wondered how a single angel could defeat not one, but 3 entire armies, and what lessons we can learn from this today? The story of these divine interventions is much more than ancient tales. They are clear examples of God's absolute power and how His authority transcends any human force. In this section, we will delve into the second of the 3 events, exploring its historical, spiritual, and teaching aspects that remain relevant for us. The second destroyed army is found in the narrative of Jericho during Joshua's conquest of Canaan. Although it is not mentioned that an angel directly killed thousands of soldiers, as in Jerusalem, the Bible describes the intervention of a celestial being known as the commander of the Lord's army. In Joshua 5:13-15, Joshua encounters a man with a drawn sword, revealed as the commander of God's army. This encounter marks a decisive moment. Victory will not depend on military strategy or the number of soldiers, but on obedience to divine instructions. The angel at Jericho directs the people of Israel to march around the city for 7 days, following God's exact instructions. The walls of Jericho collapse without a conventional battle. They fall by divine authority, transmitted through the angel. This event shows that God's power can manifest in ways that defy human logic. Victory does not depend on the number of soldiers or their strength, but on the people's willingness to follow God's instructions through His celestial messenger. Spiritually, this second event emphasizes the importance of obedience and active faith. Unlike the first event in Jerusalem, where destruction was immediate and absolute, Jericho required patience, discipline, and trust in a process that might seem strange or counterintuitive. The angel acts as a guide, ensuring believers understand that every human action must align with divine will. Obedience is not passive. It is an active commitment to God, producing results beyond human effort. Moreover, this episode shows the strategic dimension of angelic power. While in Jerusalem the intervention was direct and devastating, in Jericho the angel uses an indirect method based on guidance, signs, and the organization of the people. This teaches us that God's authority adapts to circumstances. It can be immediate and destructive or gradual and strategic, depending on what is necessary to fulfill His purpose. Victory is always assured when following divine guidance, regardless of the means used. From a historical perspective, the fall of Jericho symbolizes God's intervention in Israel's history and sets a precedent for the conquest of Canaan. Every act of the angel reinforces the idea that divine protection and judgment do not depend on human strength. Enemy armies, no matter how numerous or powerful, cannot resist God's authority manifested through His celestial messengers. This narrative demonstrates that true power lies not in weapons or military strategy, but in obedience to God and action guided by His will. The second destroyed army also reminds us that divine interventions are not always visible in terms of direct action. The angel may act so that victory occurs through processes that appear natural but are actually the result of God's will being fulfilled. This invites reflection on how God can act in our lives, often in ways we do not immediately understand, yet leading to results beyond our expectations. Spiritually, the lesson of Jericho is clear. Trust in God must be active and constant. Belief alone is not enough. One must act according to His instructions, even if they seem unconventional or difficult to understand. The angel does not replace the people's participation, but guides them, ensuring every step aligns with the divine plan. Faith, combined with obedience and patience, produces extraordinary results beyond human comprehension. Finally, this second event prepares us to understand the third miracle of a single angel facing an entire army. The story of Jericho demonstrates that divine power can manifest in diverse ways: direct, strategic, or symbolic. Each intervention teaches us something different about God's authority, the importance of obedience, and the role of angels as instruments of His will. In conclusion, the fall of Jericho, led by a single angel, not only demonstrates God's ability to alter history, but also teaches us about obedience, patience, and active faith. Angelic intervention shows that true strength does not reside in humans, but in divine will, and that celestial guidance can lead to extraordinary victories, even against seemingly impossible challenges. This second miracle reminds us that when we follow God's direction, no obstacle is insurmountable, and divine intervention always arrives at the right moment. Have you ever wondered how a single angel can completely change the fate of an army, and what these stories teach us about God's power and our spiritual life? After analyzing Jerusalem and Jericho, we reach the third event, perhaps the most complex and revealing, recorded in the story of David and the census of Israel. This event combines judgment, mercy, and the direct intervention of an angel, offering profound lessons still relevant today. The account is found in 1 Chronicles 21:15-30 and 2 Samuel 24:15-25. David, trusting in his own judgment and motivated by silent pride, orders a census of Israel and Judah. This action, though seemingly administrative, is seen by God as a sin because it reflects human reliance rather than trust in divine protection. God allows Satan to incite David, and as a result, an angel of the Lord is sent to execute judgment on Israel. Here we see something remarkable. A single angel is sufficient to unleash massive calamity, demonstrating again God's absolute authority over life and death. The magnitude of the intervention is striking. The angel traverses the land, causing the death of thousands as part of divine judgment. The Bible emphasizes that this act is not arbitrary, but a direct response to David's disobedience and the people's sin. This event shows that obedience to God and humility are essential, and that even powerful leaders must recognize their dependence on divine authority. Although the angel has the power to destroy, the Bible also shows that God's mercy can intervene. David acknowledges his sin and offers a sacrifice, which halts the angel's action. This detail reveals that intercession, prayer, and repentance have a real impact, even in the face of divine judgment. Compared to previous events, the angel's intervention in David's time is more complex because it combines judgment and mercy. In Jerusalem, the angel destroyed an enemy army immediately, and in Jericho, he guided the people to victory. Here, the angel is an instrument in a process that includes warning, repentance, and sacrifice. This teaches us that divine authority can manifest in diverse ways, sometimes immediate, sometimes strategic, and sometimes with a moral and spiritual testing component. From a spiritual perspective, this event highlights personal and collective responsibility before God's will. David, as a leader, is responsible for the people's decisions, and his sin has massive consequences. The angel's intervention shows that obedience and integrity are not merely individual matters, but affect the entire community. This reminds us that our decisions, even those that seem minor or administrative, can have spiritual and practical impact on those around us. Before continuing, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more content like this. Now, let's continue. Additionally, the account emphasizes the role of repentance and intercession. When David acknowledges his error and offers a sacrifice, the angel halts the destruction. This action demonstrates that God's power is always accompanied by justice and mercy. Obedience and active faith can change the course of events, even when judgment has already begun. In contemporary life, this translates to always having the opportunity to correct mistakes and seek divine guidance before consequences become irreversible. Another important lesson is the nature of angels as God's instruments. The angel does not act on its own initiative. It executes divine will with precision and authority. This reinforces the message that angels are representatives of God's power and authority, capable of changing the course of history without relying on human strength. Every intervention, whether destructive, strategic, or preventive, reflects God's sovereignty and His ability to intervene directly in human affairs. The third event also invites reflection on faith and humility. David, despite being king, learns that true authority does not reside in human power or armies, but in dependence on God. The story shows that even strong leaders must recognize that their success and safety depend on obedience and trust in divine authority. For believers today, this means that no matter how strong or capable we feel, our true protection and spiritual success depend on our relationship with God and our willingness to follow His guidance. Finally, this event closes a pattern. A single angel can execute God's will in ways that surpass all human capacity, demonstrating that divine authority is absolute and celestial intervention has a clear purpose. The destruction of the army in Jerusalem, the strategic guidance at Jericho, and the judgment with opportunity for repentance in David's time show the diversity of angelic power and its alignment with God's will. Each case teaches something different: protection, direction, and correction. In conclusion, the angel's intervention in David's time shows that divine power is not only capable of defeating armies, but also combines justice and mercy. A single angel radically changes history, executing God's will precisely and effectively. This account teaches the importance of obedience, repentance, active faith, and humility. It reminds us that true power is not in armies or human strategy, but in divine authority, and that our spiritual readiness and willingness to follow God are essential to experience His protection and guidance in any circumstance. Have you ever wondered why God would allow a single angel to have the power to destroy entire armies? This question leads us to reflect on divine authority and the role of angels as direct instruments of God's will. The Bible shows that angels do not act on their own initiative. They are extensions of God's power, sent to protect, guide, or execute judgment according to His purpose. Understanding this helps us appreciate the magnitude of the three events we have analyzed and their spiritual significance for us today. In all three cases, angels demonstrate that true strength does not reside in the number of soldiers or human strategy, but in God's authority. In Jerusalem, a single angel killed 185,000 soldiers in one night, showing that divine protection can be absolute and direct. In Jericho, victory was not achieved through immediate physical destruction, but by following the angel's instructions, demonstrating that divine power can also manifest strategically and guided. In David's time, angelic intervention combined judgment and mercy, reminding us that God administers justice with precision and wisdom. These events reveal a fundamental lesson. God's power transcends human understanding. Angels act as instruments of His authority, executing His will in ways that defy logic and earthly strength. This teaches us that even when facing seemingly insurmountable challenges, divine intervention can produce extraordinary results. Faith, obedience, and reliance on God are the key elements that allow His power to manifest in our lives. Moreover, the authority of the angel reflects God's sovereignty over history and human events. Every angelic action is aligned with a divine purpose: to protect the righteous, guide the people, or execute judgment on disobedience. This reminds us that nothing occurs outside of God's control, and angels are His instruments to ensure that His will is fulfilled. No matter how powerful human armies may be, they cannot resist divine authority when God decides to intervene. From a spiritual perspective, these accounts invite us to reflect on our own lives. Angels represent not only physical power, but also protection, guidance, and spiritual direction. The way God uses a single angel to execute His will reminds us that even interventions that seem small or invisible can have a monumental impact on our personal and collective history. Spiritual preparedness, obedience, and trust in God place us in a position to receive His protection and guidance in any circumstance. Finally, the intervention of angels teaches us that justice, mercy, and divine authority are always present in God's action. Whether destroying armies, guiding victories, or administering judgment, angels reflect the perfection of His plan. Each story shows that God's power does not depend on human effort, but on His will and authority, and that active faith and obedience are essential to experience that intervention. In conclusion, the authority of a single angel to destroy entire armies teaches us about God's absolute power, the importance of obedience and faith, and how angels act as direct instruments of His will. These stories remind us that, although challenges may seem insurmountable, divine intervention is always available to protect, guide, and correct according to God's purpose, and that our spiritual readiness is key to living under His protection and guidance. Have you ever wondered what lessons we can apply today from stories where a single angel defeated entire armies? Beyond the amazement at the miracles, these biblical narratives teach us spiritual principles that remain relevant for our daily life and our relationship with God. Studying these lessons helps us understand how to face challenges, trust the divine, and live with active faith in a world full of uncertainty. The first lesson is the importance of faith. In each of the three events we have reviewed, the victory or protection of God's people did not depend on human strength or military strategy, but on trust in divine authority. In Jerusalem, the people relied on God's intervention through the angel. In Jericho, they obeyed seemingly strange instructions. And in David's time, repentance and intercession stopped destruction. Active faith means believing, even when the situation seems impossible, and acting according to God's will. Obedience is another central lesson. The accounts show that divine intervention occurs through human cooperation. Joshua and the Israelites followed the angel's instructions to the letter to bring down Jericho, and David offered a sacrifice to halt judgment on Israel. Obedience is not merely a ritual act, but a demonstration of trust and respect for God, ensuring that His power manifests effectively in our lives. We also learn about humility. Even powerful leaders like Hezekiah and David faced consequences for relying too much on their judgment or for sinning. These stories remind us that true authority and security do not reside in our abilities, but in dependence on God. Humility allows us to acknowledge our human limitations and open ourselves to divine guidance and protection. Another important lesson is divine protection. The Bible shows that God can intervene in unexpected ways to protect His people. A single angel was enough to change the course of history, demonstrating that His power is not measured by human resources or numbers. This gives us hope and reminds us that even when facing enormous challenges in life, God's protection is available for those who trust and obey Him. Additionally, these stories teach that God's power combines justice and mercy. In David's case, the angel's judgment was halted due to repentance and intercession. This shows that our actions and decisions matter, and that there is always an opportunity to correct mistakes and seek reconciliation with God. Divine authority is not arbitrary. It is precise, just, and always accompanied by mercy when there is repentance. Finally, these accounts invite us to reflect on the spiritual dimension of our daily life. Armies represent obstacles and challenges, while angels represent divine intervention that guides, protects, and corrects. Applying these lessons today means living with faith, obedience, humility, and confidence that God can transform any impossible situation into spiritual and personal victory. In conclusion, the three events where a single angel destroyed entire armies teach us the importance of active faith, obedience, humility, divine protection, and God's mercy. These stories are not just historical miracles, but guides for our daily life, reminding us that true strength lies not in human ability, but in our relationship with God and our willingness to follow His will, trusting in His power to transform any impossible situation into triumph. Ultimately, these stories show us that a single angel, acting under God's authority, can change the course of history, teaching us about faith, obedience, and divine protection. If these accounts amazed you, and you want to continue exploring the secrets and miracles of the Bible, subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. We want to know which of these interventions impacted you the most, and how you think these lessons apply to your life today. Don't miss our upcoming videos full of biblical mysteries and teachings.